Hello to everyone listening here on the webinar. Thank you for joining. My name is Daniel Waldron, and I'd like to welcome all of you to Taming the Strange Beasts, Servicing and the Future of PAYGo. I represent the consultative group to assist the poor, many of you as CGAP. For those of you who don't know us, CGAP is an independent think tank focused on financial inclusion. They're housed at the World Bank, but funded by over 35 external members, including CDC. And CGAP has been researching and collaborating in the PAYGo solar sector since 2015, and frankly, we view it as one of the more exciting developments in financial inclusion over that time. I'm here today, along with Jeff Manley from CDC, to present a paper of the same name that was released toward the end of 2018. Jeff, if you're there, would you mind just saying hi and giving us a brief introduction to CDC for those who might not know it as well?
Hi, everyone. This is Jeff Manley from CDC. CDC is the UK Development Finance Institution. We are focused on investing in Africa and South Asia to promote economic development and, in particular, job growth and job creation. I sit in the debt team here at CDC, in charge of a team focused on providing debt solutions to the off-grid solar space, with a particular focus on providing local currency receivables finance to pay-as-you-go companies, and collaborate with other parts of the organization, direct equity, as well as our fund investment teams that are also active investing in the space.
Great. And along with the two of us, the paper was also co-authored by Emma Hawkins and Mathilde Girard of CDC and Alexandra Soterio of CGAP. So our thanks go out to them, and they were an invaluable part of putting all this together. Just to do a little bit of housekeeping before we really get into things, this is an audio broadcast and is a one-way webinar. Attendee mics are not turned on, so please do not shout angry responses into your microphones, but rather type them into the chat box you'll see in the lower right-hand corner. Make sure to select all participants from the drop-down menu, otherwise we might miss it. And if you're worried that you missed a salient point or detail, please do not fear. We will be sending out a recording to everyone listening, and please forward it to all of your colleagues and friends. Just to give everyone a sense of the session, we'll wrap up interactions in a minute or two once we introduce our other panelists. Jeff and I will present the paper, and after that, we'll bring on those panelists to share their thoughts on some of the key issues in the paper, and then we'll throw it open to the audience for those questions. So please send them in as they occur to you. We'll have someone reading and curating them as we go, and we'll bring them back up at the end for myself, for Jeff, but hopefully as well for the gentlemen in attendance, because we have a really distinguished panel of guests on today. Who I would like to introduce to you. Starting with Michael Naga. Michael is the General Manager in charge of Digital Lending for Equity Group. I'm sure many of you know Equity on the line. For those of you who don't, they offer inclusive, customer-focused financial services throughout East Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, South Sudan, and DRC, as well as through a number of innovative channels and affiliates in those countries. Michael, if you're there, could you say hello? And it's great to have you on.
Thank you very much. Good evening. It's evening on this end. Hello, my name is Michael. As you rightly said, yes, I'm glad to be here.
We appreciate you joining. Yeah, I think we've got people coming in from all corners of the globe. Globes don't have corners, but we'll move on. We also have Alexandra Coster, who is the CEO and the founder of Baobab, which is a social business committed to providing access to energy and digital services. They offer innovative products with financing solutions that meet the needs of local populations. Baobab is operating in Senegal, Mali, Madagascar, and Cote d'Ivoire, and they are part of the larger Baobab Group, which is one of the leaders in offering digital financial services to individuals and small enterprises in 10 countries in Africa as well as China. Welcome, Alexandra. Thank you for joining.
Hello, everybody. Nice to meet you, and I'm glad to participate with this webinar.
Appreciate it. And last but certainly not least, Hugh Whalen is the CEO and co-founder of PEG Africa, which provides financing for life-changing and useful products such as solar home systems. They operate in Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, and Senegal. And Hugh has a wealth of experience in the off-grid energy sector stemming from a number of different business ventures, so we're extremely glad to have him on. Hey, Hugh.
Hi, looking forward to the chat.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So without any further ado, let's get into the paper. So this paper, Taming the Strange Beasts, is based on another paper called Strange Beasts, and that was released by CGAP and IC in January of 2018. If you haven't read it, you should. It's wonderful. That paper analyzed the business organization and financial model of a PAYGo solar company, which produces, distributes, and finances assets for off-grid customers. For those of you who are not familiar with PAYGo Solar, this discussion may get a little bit technical, but I think you'll find it relevant. There's certainly many more introductory materials you can find on CGAP's website and gogla.org and elsewhere. And urge you to certainly read more about it. But it's one of the more exciting developments in financial inclusion is they are financing the sale of really important assets to often financially excluded and off-grid customers. The Strange Beasts paper used the value chain framework that you see here. There's durable goods value on the top, lending and leasing on the bottom. Some people argue it could be three value chains in terms of having a product, the retail, and then the financing, but you get the idea. The vertically integrated PAYGo company is both a retailer and an originator. They manage both inventory and a balance sheet, and they service a physical asset as a loan. And that last bit is what we'll really dive into today. So the important thing to note about this business model is that it requires you to be good at a lot of things, which makes it very difficult, although not impossible, to execute them well. But remember, there didn't used to be a choice. 6 years ago, there were no PAYGo-enabled systems. There was no fancy software to manage them. There was nobody to reliably partner with on distribution and financing. And so companies that began the sector, M-Copa, Off-Grid Electric, Nazola, Mogisol, PEG, Baobab Plus, Phoenix International, it served these companies well, and it still does, for many of them, to do all these things in-house. But for newer entrants, that necessity is arguably no longer there. More recently, we've seen companies enter the space, see that you can buy a PAYGo-ready solar kit, see that you can license software to run it, and say, well, that looks easier. And so this new sort of value chain with a third-party manufacturer and software, that's what's sort of called PAYGo 2.0. It enables you to be leaner and more flexible. You can go quickly to market. You can offer a variety of different products, and you can run them, hopefully, on just one software platform. So that's the first evolution. But where's the next shift? And where's PAYGo 3.0? Well, frankly, we're still waiting on that. We think it could look something like this, where PAYGo companies actually outsource the financing side of the business to a third party, a bank or an MFI or another type of lender. Now, this would admittedly be the most extreme version, where origination is done by a financial partner and the PAYGo company becomes an incredibly effective distributor and servicer of the assets. You could also imagine other arrangements where the PAYGo company originates, but a bank does the ultimate financing and services the loan. Or if the partnership is tight enough, maybe the PAYGo company fully owns the customer relationship and a financial institution sits in the background. Either way, any way you slice it, the main benefit here is that it would enable rapid scalability. PAYGo companies could recycle their capital much faster. They could rely on partners who know credit and who have lots of local currency liabilities. But while there have been some early-stage examples, we don't really see this happening. And that just is going to tell you why. So I'll hand things over to him. Jeff, if you're there, I think your mic might be on mute.
Yeah. Sorry, just taking control of the presentation here. Okay. Bear with me here. There we go. Okay, great. So, if the idea of this decoupling sounds so great, why hasn't it actually happened? So we started to look at that and came up with at least 4 reasons. There are probably more. But the first of which is that, as Dan alluded to earlier, I think when these early companies were getting started, there simply wasn't an ecosystem of partners that they could even collaborate with. And so I think this fully vertically integrated model was born as much out of necessity as anything else. Another is that the companies haven't necessarily had the luxury to sort of step back and develop these kinds of partnerships. They're dealing with rolling out complex business models, raising capital, launching in new countries, so lots of other things that are absorbing bandwidth. Another is the question of customer ownership. So nearly every PAYGo company that we talk to sees a lot of value in owning that customer relationship, wants to have that ongoing contact with the customer, And some people may see decoupling and having a financing partner involved as diluting that ownership of the customer. And also possibility of moral hazard. So I think when the company that is originating the PAYGo loans is also fully responsible for the repayment and bears all of the financial consequences of that, there's a real alignment of interests. But if that starts to get separated and the originator of the PAYGo loans no longer feels that they're really truly on the hook for the performance, that could be quite problematic. And the sort of last point that we came up with is it's just there are a few different places in these two value chains where it's really difficult to separate them. One we see is sort of on the sales and distribution and origination and underwriting side, and that's really a separate topic that there's probably a lot to be said about that. And then the other place is really what we're focused on, which is this nexus of ongoing support to the customer and servicing the customer from a product perspective, but also acting as the collections and loan servicing function. So this is servicing, and we're sort of starting off here with a somewhat academic definition. This comes from a manual on securitization. So it has that angle to it, but I think it's useful to just sort of talk through this. So we're talking here about all of the various activities that the originator, in this case the PAYGo company, would have in the normal course of business performed. So sending invoices, monitoring collections, sending reminders, taking recovery action, and so on, and all of the activities in relation to distribution of the cash so collected to the investors. And so that's what we're sort of working with as a definition of servicing in a generic sense. But let's have a look at it applied to the pay-as-you-go context. So if we look at this diagram, we have the PAYGo company in the middle, and they're essentially taking investment from different investors in the form of debt and equity. They're transforming that into energy products and services that are attractive to PAYGo households who are then happy to pay deposits and top-up payments for the goods and services that they're receiving. And when we actually look at how the companies are doing this, we see it at three different levels. So the first level would be the CRM system, whether this is a third-party sort of backbone like Naga, or many companies have developed their own proprietary systems. But this is collecting all of the data on customers, managing the mobile money payments, sending codes, sending reminders in some cases, and really underpinning the operation. Then you'll see the companies have call centers. So they're taking inbound calls from customers that may be having problems with their systems or making payments, but also very importantly making outbound calls to customers that need reminders because they've fallen behind. And then the third level would be actual people on the ground who would go out to probably the more challenging credit cases, people that have really fallen behind, to try to engage directly face-to-face with those customers, understand what's happening, see if they can be brought back current, or in an extreme case, actually repossessing the solar home system. So why does all of this matter? So we really think that this servicing relationship, it really encapsulates the ongoing relationship between the company and the customer over the product life. And so from a customer perspective, it's a bundle of communications and payments that are going back and forth between the PAYGo company and the customer, and those all need to mesh and work well together for everyone to be happy. And from a company perspective, this is a really challenging aspect of the business. We talked about the three different levels that all need to be sort of functioning well together and coordinated. Bridging the two value chains, the technical complexity of coordinating these activities, and this is very different, I think, from sort of servicing as you might think of it in developed countries. This is a very high-touch operation. a lot of outreach needed to customers to understand what's happening and make sure that systems are working and that they're happy with the product and able to pay their top-ups. And so ultimately, the difference between a company doing this poorly and doing it well is going to have a massive impact on the value of any receivables that you might be looking to finance. So we started to look at this across a number of different financing models, and so looked at 4 of them. If we look on the left, the sort of least decoupled option would be an on-balance sheet financing facility. This is, a joined-up view on the operating company as well as the receivables and looking at those risks together. You can then start to decouple by looking at off-balance sheet or securitization type transactions where the operating company, the originator, continues to service those loans, but those loans are sold into a separate structure, and depending on the specificities of that structure, the financier may be taking a limited view just on the risk of those receivables and not necessarily the operating company. You can also look at captive finance companies, and we see these most easily in the automotive space, for example, where you have an automotive manufacturer that produces and sells cars and has a dedicated financing arm that has a separate management structure, but it's all the same ownership. And then at the extreme, you can look at a direct financing model where a bank or an MFI can actually provide finance directly to the end customer, which then means that the PAYGo company doesn't actually need to be the source of that financing. And so as you move to the right of this spectrum, you may be under the impression that you are taking less risk on the operating company, but we actually think that as things stand today, that's not the case. We actually think that in all of these models, you are explicitly taking the risk of the originator, of the operating company, and that is because there are no backup servicing mechanisms in place. And so one of the real primary goals of this paper is to try and stimulate a discussion on how can we develop backup servicing options, how can we develop decoupling options, because we think that ultimately this will really mitigate one of the core risks that we see in the PAYGo business model, and hopefully that will open up more capital coming into the industry. So with that, let me hand it back over to Dan.
Thank you, Jeff. Just waiting to receive control here, but just, and I can talk a little bit ahead of that. Just to be clear on what we're saying there, if you are a lender trying to figure out what you'll be able to recover if an originator falls over, if you are a PAYGo company trying to structure a facility where you isolate the risk of your receivables from your company, if you're a PAYGo bank, MFI trying to structure a partnership where someone other than the PAYGo company does the financing, so if you're any of these 3 right here, or if you're even considering any of these, then you really need to ask yourself, who else can service these loans? Can anyone do it except the company that originated them? And if the answer is no, and it very often is, then the repayment risk is not isolated from the OpCo, what Jeff is saying. You are on balance sheet at the group level, and any disruption to that OpCo will lower the value of those receivables. That's that massive difference that Jeff talked about between good servicing and bad servicing. But then we're talking about no servicing. And then where are you? What is your loss given default in that circumstance? So this is obviously not a unique situation for PAYGo. Any investor that is taking receivables as collateral needs a strategy to recover that value without relying solely on the originator. And so you'll hear people talking about creating bankruptcy remote structures, and that's great. That's a great idea. But the important thing to remember is receivables are not bankruptcy remote just because it says so on the top of the page. They are only bankruptcy remote if they still have value after a bankruptcy. And so if there's only one entity that can process customer payments and unlock customer systems and access mobile money accounts, if there is only one elevator and there are no stairs, then you are stuck. Then it is not bankruptcy remote. It is just a glib illusion, as Fabazi and Kothari put it here. And to be clear, this is not a hypothetical problem. In August and September of last year, we spoke with a number of companies about their backup servicing, and one provider, as you see here, had a plan to use their expansion team as their backup. So this is the team that goes to new markets and opens up those markets, but they could also go to existing ones and help buttress a local affiliate that's struggling. Several had some sort of living will or rundown scenario where investors would either activate remote backup systems or physically take over systems in country should the originator go insolvent, and they would pay staff double to stay on. And many told us that they had thought about it, but that having a backup was not a priority and that they had not been incentivized by their investors to take any action. So the reality is that those investors are completely reliant on these companies, and many of whom, because they're early growth stage companies, are not profitable. We see this as a problem, as an under-respected risk of the PAYGo business model. And mitigating that risk means having someone else who can service PAYGo loans. Now, there are the multiple aspects to PAYGo servicing that Jeff just talked about, and higher-level functions like maintenance would be more expensive to provide as a backup service. They would likely produce high repayment, so you'd need to figure out what the ROI of having those there would be. But there are a number of options to just do the Tier 1 and Tier 2 parts, which would probably get you at least 50, who knows how many cents on the dollar, but would certainly be better than nothing. Living wills are a great first step. Financial institutions with a last-mile presence, such as Equity Bank or Baobab, could be contracted as backup servicers. Be interested to talk about that in a little bit. Licensors of either hardware or software, they're in a really interesting place to step in and run systems that they know because they created them. Licensees could potentially do the same. So to give a concrete example, PEG Africa sells D-Lite systems and they use a D-Lite management platform. Could D-Lite step in and run their portfolio in the event of something extraordinary happening? Possibly. Could PEG Africa do the same for D-Lite in a different market? Again, it's certainly a possibility. Within markets, competitors could also have pre-existing arrangements to act as backup, sort of break glass in case of emergency. Or more likely, they could buy each other's portfolios. We've actually seen this happen in the PAYGo sector. In Pakistan, where Eco Energy, there was a struggling competitor. They bought up their portfolio. They didn't want to see the sector spoiled in that market. And they serviced the outstanding loans, and they started cross-selling to those customers, and that's worked out reasonably well. And then, there's the sort of holy grail, to be an actual backup servicer. The sector is likely not large enough for a standalone backup servicer to be commercially viable, but potentially as part of a larger PAYGo licensing operation or even a PAYGo bank, this could be possible, particularly with some early donor support. And note that all of these are going to have issues of systems compatibility, of data structuring. Standardization makes backup servicing much more viable. If there's a level of commonality around communication protocols, around data structuring, around, dare I say it, KPIs, that could go a long way to mitigating some of this risk and allowing somebody else to service a portfolio if an originator gets into trouble. So just to conclude on a series of recommendations here, and then we'll turn things over to the panel. We need to start having these experiments. So we have a lot of ideas here, but it's time to start figuring out what they look like in the field. Now, donors can help to fund those experiments and to see what works, but investors need to recognize the bets they are taking and figure out how to mitigate them through one mechanism or another. Again, as I just said, standardization could actually go a long way towards unlocking capital, although I think some of our panelists may disagree on that point, so it's a discussion worth having. And financial institutions that want to grow their customer base, that want to serve off-grid, rural, low-income, financially excluded customer base, need to understand how PAYGo companies are doing what they're doing and how they, financial institutions, can partner with them to reach that customer base and to help even grow and expand the PAYGo model. And so with that, we have come to the end of our presentation. Thank you so much for listening thus far. I hope you are all frantically sending questions into the chat window. I haven't seen too many yet. But please remember to send them when you do to all participants. Right now, I'm going to turn things over to our esteemed panelists, and so you'll see their faces and names right here. And I'd like to just start by asking each of them what their one big takeaway is from this presentation, from this paper. What's the one thing that resonates or that they disagree with or that they think is really relevant for their growth as a company? And I'll begin with Alexander. What jumped out to you from hearing this presentation?
Okay, thanks. Very, very interesting. So I think that just to give the case of Baobab Plus is a subsidiary of a microfinance group, previously Microcredit and now renamed to Baobab. So for sure, from the beginning, when we developed Baobab Plus to develop the pay-as-you-go distribution model, we are looking initially to this pay-as-you-go 3.0 to see maybe how Microcredit can provide a loan to the pay-as-you-go clients. But you described some barriers for that, but some of them were not in our case because it should be very easy for us to make, because we are in the same group, to organize it. But there are also some, I think, barriers for a pay-as-you-go company. If you only sell the product and do not do the financing part, you have also an issue in terms of profitability of the PAYGo company, because the last mile distribution is very expensive, and with the margins that we can do only on the product sales and not on the financing side, I think it should be very difficult to be profitable for a PAYGo company. So that's why it was also one of the reasons that we decided that Baobab Plus will provide under this company the financing part of the pay-as-you-go solution, and because to have also our some revenue generated on the financing part. And the other point also is that when we discuss with Microcredit team in the different countries, even they support us in terms of how to organize and manage risk evaluation, etc. Clearly, for them, they are more in urban and peri-urban areas, and the population that we plan to reach with PAYGo more in rural area, clearly they say that for them, they don't have this experience and capacity to collect and manage the risk, etc. And that's why most of the MFI are currently more in urban and peri-urban area, because it's very difficult for them also to manage, even for an MFI, to manage the risk and the collection, etc. in rural areas. So I think this point is it's important to understand. And the last point also, a barrier also, is that MFI it's a financial institution. They have to applicate a loan interest, etc. And in most countries where we are, you have some cap in terms of financial interest rate, and if it's an official loan, they have to apply this cap, etc. But pay-as-you-go model, it's a bit different, is that we want to give maximum of flexibility to the clients. So it not looks like a loan, it's just total amount that they have to pay in 1 year or 2 years, but without penalty or thing like this. And so we integrate the financial cost in the final price, the retail price. But if it's financed directly by an MFI, you have to be more a classic loan with maybe less flexibility, and also and they have to integrate also this cap on the interest rate. That should be maybe difficult for them. So there are some I think in the global sector, some issues that you describe to move to pay-as-you-go 3.0, but also in terms of profitability and experience of MFI also to do this type of job that they are not used to do in rural areas. And finally, we can see that the experience that Baobab has developed in the field, maybe we are more able and more in capacity to do that job compared to microcredit like a classic MFI.
Well, I mean, there's certainly a lot to dive in there, but I mean, just from my notes, so there's where's the profit question, right? If you're just doing distribution, does the actual business model work? And then the rural, obviously, market is very hard. There's a lot of financial service providers who are not there and who don't understand it. And then obviously the interest rate caps and the regulation and how the pricing would actually look if you were more regulated or if an MFI was doing it, for example, gets a lot trickier. Those are all excellent points. Thank you. Hugh, just turning over to you. What jumps out? What's the popcorn? What really jumps out to you from this presentation or paper?
I think Alex did such a good job of covering his part that he took kind of all my talking points. So I had to think of something interesting to say that wasn't what he said. But I do want to echo that I don't see us ever outsourcing credit, ever. I think it's core to our business. It gives us a platform that allows us to understand customers and therefore finance other things to them. And I don't think it's hard to sell stuff. I think it's really hard to get money back. So that, I don't see us doing that anytime soon. And then in relation to servicing, it's a really interesting discussion because we spend a lot of time on credit. We think a lot about credit, and we've been in the industry for a while. I think everyone does things differently, and I don't know if there's any standardization across any of the companies. And I think it's going to be incredibly hard to step into somebody's operation and figure out, how to get money back. It's an interesting question also for, there being trade sales in our industry. How do you actually get a handle on the quality and actual value of the receivables? Because if everybody has a different approach, you don't really know how to value it. I was talking to a guy who does private equity last night, and he was telling me that they bought a $9 billion balance sheet in 24 hours. So they got an email. They said there's this business that's struggling. They sent their team, and literally they worked all through the night. In 24 hours, they had bought $9 billion of balance sheet. And we just have so far to go to ever get to a point where somebody can complete a transaction in, even frankly, 20 times that amount of time. So that's kind of what stuck out to me.
Okay, I want to follow up on a couple of those points, but those are really excellent. I'll turn over to Michael. Michael, what jumped out to you? Anything similar? You operate a very different business, I think, than our other two panelists. What from this resonates with you?
Thank you, Dan. I think the disadvantage of speaking last is that all the points have been taken. But I think one of the things that strikes me when I think about the PAYGo business model is, and the opportunity the financial institutions have will always be who owns the customer. Because the moment that you have a struggle on the who owns the customer, then you'll always have a challenge in terms of servicing, whether you want to do the last mile kind of conversation with the customer when it comes to collecting from them, whether you want to more or less cross-sell or upsell, given that a financial institution will not necessarily focus on the PAYGo facilities, then that particular challenge of who owns the customer becomes a big one. And for us, then we'll need to look at, can we be an aggregator of some solutions? An aggregator in the sense that as Hugh mentioned, collecting from a customer, then you're limited to the kind of demographic or financial information that you gather from that particular customer. And if you have to go the long haul and trying to get some additional information, then it becomes very expensive, because then you have to pay the price for the legwork that someone has to do to visit the particular entity. And as the business continues evolves, I see a lot of digital conversations happening. So it will be, how do we plug in and try to collaborate and more or less build a kind of a solution together that taps into various data sets that one may have, because I may not necessarily be looking at data sets that are within the bank that are the same things that probably the PAYGo company may have, but probably there's some data points like getting into the credit bureaus of the market and other proprietary information that we may have from people we aggregate data that probably may not have sight of, the PAYGo company may not have sight of. So for me, I think doing the whole legwork of doing this particular is what struck me, because that complexity of when you start having collaborations and then there's a struggle of who owns the customer, then complexity is definitely. But within those complexities, definitely you see opportunities, but it's how the value proposition is from the financial institution to the PAYGo company. Because one of the things I've seen PAYGo companies struggling a lot is their account receivables. They will struggle with that because then there will be capital issues that they have to think about, and probably the financial institution can take away that headache from them and try to see how do you turn around your capital to do other things and probably turn out more. But then it has to be a conscious conversation that the PAYGo company must be willing to have with the financial institution.
Well, I think, and so thank you all of you for weighing in there. Michael, just to follow up on that then, since you went last, I think we can dive a little deeper. So you've talked a lot about, I think, some of the barriers in terms of what data there is and what you can learn just by looking at the customer info that's gathered by the PAYGo company. But let's talk about the opportunities there, right? I mean, you see these companies, you live in Kenya, lots of PAYGo operations, lots of people serving off-grid markets. Ideally for you, what would Equity's relationship be with those types of lenders? Do you see yourself as eventually competing with them on the ground? Do you see yourself as sort of offering the next level of financial services? What would the ideal situation look like for you in the next few years in relation to PAYGo?
I think it's a mix of both, because one of the things that probably we want to progress is a conversation, because today when you finance the customer for PAYGo solution, and maybe let's, for example, it's a renewable energy product, but then the lifetime of that product will be, say, 2 years, and the customer pays up to that. Then what happens to that technology? Does it die off? But probably in my space, I could see the conversation that we can continue progressing with this customer for other merchandise products that we can do and dovetail on the PAYGo technology that is there. But then when we facilitate that kind of conversation, then there's an opportunity for the PAYGo company to look at us as wholesale financial providers. But then also tapping into our database as a financial institution to propel the products and some information that we may have that they may not have, and getting it at a very easy and cost-effective manner. Probably those are the opportunities I see in terms of collaboration, and you can position a product out there in the market that helps a product that can be positioned and is jointly facilitated. Yes, the product is there, but we become the end financial for that particular customer and cross-sell opportunities. That's what, for me, I see a big opportunity for that.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think to me anyway, there's a clear value proposition there. Hugh, I'd be curious what you think. I mean, you've just said you're not going to outsource financing at the retail level. As partner with somebody like an Equity, who I realize doesn't operate in your markets, but as that sort of wholesale partner, would that make sense for you? What complexity does that bring to your business?
I mean, I think we'd certainly take a look at it and be open to discussing it. I don't think that currently, access to debt capital is something that is a constraint for us. Certainly each transaction takes a lot of effort and takes a lot of time. So it would be nice to have something that's very replicable, and the bank partnership would, I would think, provide us with that. It would. I have to say that I think we would have to get really comfortable with who owns the data, at the end of the day, it is very costly to get these customers. And there is a lifetime value that the industry doesn't really know yet because we haven't been around for long enough, but we think it's a substantial lifetime value, that we can give loan for a solar home system and then a loan for something else and so on, because customers are aspirational and they need and want a lot of stuff. But if we're working with a bank, the bank sees all the repayment information. At some point, the bank's going to be interested in lending directly to that customer, and then they've got a cheaper source of funds, and they're going to out-compete us with our own customer, and we lose that customer for good, I would imagine.
Right. I think these are the issues that Jeff kind of talked about in terms of, that have prevented partnerships from really developing, and it's not that it's not that there's a lack of trust, it's just that it's honestly a competitive market, and they are logical competitors. Hugh, just staying on you for one question I wanted to follow up on from what you talked about. In terms of private equity securing a $9 billion balance sheet overnight, I mean, doesn't that speak somewhat to the benefits of standardization? And maybe I'm reading wrong, but I gather you're somewhat skeptical that it's going to move in this direction, or you just think it's going to take time?
Oh, no, I love it. I just think that we are a long, long, long way from being there. And, we will naturally progress to that point over time as the industry matures and there are more standards put in place, etc. But, I would think that we're kind of 5-10 years away from having that level of knowledge, be widespread enough for transactions to happen that quickly.
Okay. Alex, coming back to you. Well, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on what Michael and Hugh just talked about, but then I'd also like to ask, you have, I think, a unique vision of financial inclusion, or maybe a unique way of partnering with a really interesting financial institution as Baobab. You've talked a little bit about this, but I guess maybe it'd be worth saying what you've looked at in financial inclusion in terms of getting access for your customers to higher level financial services, and how these servicing challenges are playing out in the field as you try and do that. And obviously CGAP is partnering with Baobab. We can talk a little bit about that. We'll certainly be talking much more about it in the future.
Yes. So just to come back on the structure, that Baobab Plus have two different business units with two different distribution channels and financing. And it's important to understand that in our partnership with Baobab Group, where we are in. It's the first one. Initially, we leverage existing microfinance clients of Baobab and their distribution channel to offer our products to their clients. And on that case, Baobab Plus don't finance anything. So it's directly Baobab who propose a top-up loan to their current clients to buy the Baobab Plus solar products. But this is more so in urban and peri-urban areas. And for to reach more rural areas where Baobab is not, we use the pay-as-you-go distribution model and financing model to those clients. And so it's important to understand that, because I think it generally for microfinance or financial institution, what is interesting in that is that so they can when the pay-as-you-go clients finish to pay. So important thing to understand is that more than to selling a solar energy, we create first an initial financial experience with some rural population who have not yet before used mobile money, or maybe Kenya is different, but in West Africa they have never used financial services like mobile money. They never had a loan or something like this. And so when you sell a pay-as-you-go product, and as you say, you have a lot of costs for client acquisition, but also for clients to change their behaviors in terms to pay on a regular basis, how to use mobile money, etc. So there's a big training also job that we have to do, and this asset is very important after to leverage it and to propose it after to other MFI, or in our case to Baobab. And clearly, if Baobab Group have invested in Baobab Plus, is to use Baobab Plus as also a very interesting tool for client acquisition in rural areas. And after, with this initial pay-as-you-go experience and the data that we have collected, we can, Baobab Group can propose some digital loan to those clients. But this should not happen with all of MFI. You need to find an MFI who is interested in moving to rural area markets, and it's not the case of all MFI because it's a more risky segment of population for an MFI. And also an MFI who want to move also from classic microfinance organization and business model to more digital lending model, because your population of pay-as-you-go are more in rural area, and a classic microfinance distribution model could not work in rural area if this institution not want also to move to a more digital lending model with scoring system and provide it through mobile money or through an agent's network, etc. And so that's why I think, yeah, as you said, we just started last year in partnership with CGAP in the part of Senegal. Now we are extending it to all Senegal and launch a new pilot of that. And clearly, it's a real advantage for a financial institution, and in that case, the pay-as-you-go company can make a partnership with them to say, okay, I can also raise some debt, local debt to you at a good pricing, but also in our partnership, in the second time, I can also share to you some good pay-as-you-go clients if you want to propose to them digital lending. So this type of partnership. And when we speak about the risk, what we have seen also is that if your clients perceive that you want to create with them a long-term relationship, and if at the time of the pay-as-you-go payment, they can also be able to have some financial loan, they will be able to pay better, use your solar system. And so in that case, it's also for the pay-as-you-go company like an advantage to reduce the repayment risk if the clients perceive long-term options with you.
Right. They can be motivated by the potential of future loans, and that gives them, the incentive to pay off the current one as well.
Exactly.
Well, thank you. I certainly have a bunch more questions, and maybe we can get to some of those. But I've promised to open things up, and we've gotten a lot of good questions just now over the channel. So I'll throw one open to whoever wants to answer it. And Jeff, please unmute as well. It'd be glad to have your perspective here. From Lindsay Caldwell, do partnership challenges limit the ability of local companies to participate effectively in the PAYGo space? I think there's a bunch of different perspectives we could give on that. I'd be curious from our participants who would have a thought there.
I can take a shot at this one. I don't think it limits the ability of local companies to participate. I do think that it means you need to have a significant amount of funding behind you. And that certainly is a challenge for any company. So there are more and more startups getting into different markets, and even crowded markets are getting new companies entering regularly. I don't think the lack of partnerships stops them from doing what they want to do. I do think that partnerships would accelerate significantly the entrance of new companies into all markets.
I think that sounds right to me as well. Unless there's another word from one of the other panelists. We've got a question. Can we share examples, lessons learned of PAYGo companies in Africa whose portfolios were taken over by another company? And maybe there are examples there. I'm not aware of one that's been completed, although I know certainly institutions have looked at it. And maybe some of them would care to weigh in. Michael, I know, I mean, your colleagues have talked a little bit about looking at this in the past. Is there anything you can sort of tell us about what issues or what possibility, I think you brought up some of this earlier, but whether there is an opportunity for you to ever buy up those loan books and service those clients?
Thanks, Dan. I think those options are available because the issue that I see the PAYGo companies, like I've mentioned, a few of them that we struggle with, is that ability to collect the facilities, and probably given that we will not necessarily deploy a resource purely only for the PAYGo kind of facilities, it will be a shared resource. So it doesn't really apportion a lot of cost for us as a bank, and we can be able to pick at. The only complexity we'll need to look at is probably run their models through more or less like a retro assessment. It's similar to what you may do like a factoring kind of a scenario, but then so that you can look at the likelihood of picking up the good. But then also it speaks to the kind of quality of information they capture on the CRM as well, on the onboarding bit, then that will definitely inform quite a bit of that. But in terms of the opportunities to take that up, yes, those opportunities are there, but it has to be, it brings me back to the same conversation I was running, who owns the customer? Right. Will the PAYGo really want to let go of the relationship in totality, or they will be saying, okay, collect the facility, but then the relationship becomes with us? Because for us, I think it will be a conversation that will have to go on, and an opportunity for us to cross-sell and upsell other particular facilities and build some loyalty of some sort to, even as we build in other products. That's how I'd look at it.
I mean, this is the really interesting question, right? And then this is largely what motivated this paper. Just to sort of bounce off that real quick, Hugh, and Alex, I'll ask a similar question to you in a second. But Hugh, you have a licensing arrangement with somebody who knows how to operate PAYGo management software and PAYGo kits. Could they come in and take over your portfolio? You kind of alluded to this, but I'd be curious to get into the details of it. Would somebody like D-Light be able to do that for you quickly? Would it take longer? What's the technical reality of that?
Yeah, I do think that because we license software and the hardware from the same company, that they would be able to come in and understand what we're doing. I think there'd be a steep learning curve in the field, where the rubber hits the road and where we actually intervene with customers and how often, etc. But yeah, they would be, I think, well placed to do a better job than anyone else.
And would the reverse be roughly true? If D-Light in a neighboring country has an issue, could you step in?
Yeah, I think the reverse is true too.
Okay. Alexander, I mean, what are your thoughts about microfinance?
Yeah, in our side, so we the difference with PEG is that we have a different, we work with different company for the hardware and software. So that's why we can stay agnostic in terms of the product, and that we are doing now, working with different solar products linked to the market demand or the evolution of the product. And I think it's on two sides about data. So clearly in the agreement that we have with them, they can't use the data on for each user. It's only on aggregated basis that they can get the trend and some analysis. But we have the ownership of the clients. But I think if we have to secure this also for our investors that they usually ask about is on both sides. So what the agreement that we have with for the software, we have our own also data warehouse which is on daily basis. We have an API between our licensor, the data servers, and our own data warehouse, and we can every day get all the data. Also, for example, if our licensor have any financial issue for any reason they have to stop, we already have all the background and all the data. with us. And in our contract, we can, if they have to stop their activity, to take also all the codes, etc., to continue to manage the pay-as-you-go model with our own clients. And in the other case, if for any reasons Baobab Plus have some issues and have to stop, etc., so they explained to us that if someone buy Baobab Plus, for example, they can transfer their ownership of all the data, and another company can leverage and use all this CRM data and to continue to follow up our current clients. But one thing you mentioned also in the presentation is very important. I think I think in the future we have to have some standardization for software and hardware to facilitate, for example, currently, if we want to move to another platform system, we have to continue with two different systems. It's the case that we have in Ivory Coast. We move from one software solution to another one. But for 1 year, we have to continue to manage the business with two different platforms because we have to finalize all the previous clients with the initial one and all the new clients on the second one. And because there is no connection and possibilities to manage the previous clients in the new platform. So I think it's one important evolution that I think the sector has to move on. I know that there are some discussion between those suppliers and software companies, but I think we are still far from this.
Yeah, I think you'll see more of that. I mean, to Hugh's point, that'll be a natural evolution to some degree. How much can be driven externally? I don't think we know yet, but it would certainly help companies like yours to manage more assets and maybe deploy different solutions in different contexts. We only have a few minutes left. I've gotten a question offline from Jacob Winicky regarding Ecomoto. So, Michael, I think this one will be for you, which is how does Ecomoto reimagine the PAYGo value chain? And what role do you see for PAYGo providers maybe you could talk more about the product, but what role do you see for PAYGo providers if that product scales and is successful?
For us, Ecomoto cuts across the various platforms in terms of the solutions that we can. But in terms of the context of, so ideally how Ecomoto works is that we have a direct catalog that we provide to the customer, and we work with cross-functional and entities and retailers or companies that are retailing, whether they're manufacturers or onward sellers. Then they front load the products there together with the pricing, and the customer just needs to pick up the particular facility against a limit that has already been defined, because we have an algorithm that has credits scored them. And in terms of that kind of a thinking, then the opportunity with the PAYGo company is that we're getting into partnerships with, like you mentioned, with companies like Angaza, who have the local technology, and that can be used by PAYGo companies that they don't have to really invest in that, and can utilize their products to as long as they're compatible with that, then we can be able to have their pricing into that conversation and give the footprint across the regions that we operate on that. So for us, Ecomoto is just a platform that we've created, and the kind of products that are going to be populated out there is a cut across, where PAYGo kind of thinking products are also part of the products that we showcase to the customers and finance them against that. So in terms of, this is what I was talking about earlier, that in case we get into partnerships with that particular entity that has stocking of those products that are supported, like the solutions of local technology, then we could use that kind of thinking as upon closing off of the facility that has been financed for the PAYGo. That can also be done on other merchandises. The customer can reuse the same as security for other facilities. And then that continues building up the relationship with the customer and making sure that the customer is onboarded and more or less building up into the financial inclusion conversation.
I think, I mean, it's a really exciting initiative, and I know CGAP and others are very excited to see where it goes. We're nearing the ending of our time here. I'd like to, Jeff.
Daniel, sorry, Daniel. There's a colleague of mine I know who we work very closely. I can see he's part of the attendees. I don't know whether he would want to say something. Is that allowed?
I'm afraid we're probably. I mean, it might have been. I'm afraid we're probably out of time, as I need to wrap things up in the next 60 seconds or so. Here. So
no worries.
I'm very happy to follow any of these questions over email if anyone wants to write. I'm dwaldron@worldbank.org. Jeff, if you're there, I'd just love to bring you back in to see if you have any sort of final word on where you would love to see discussions build off of this and go in the near future. If you just had sort of 30 seconds to where you would like to see this discussion head.
Sure. So thanks a lot, Dan, and thanks everybody for participating. I think it was really interesting to hear, a lot of the challenges that I think, we touched on and some new ones that were mentioned that, probably explain today why we haven't seen a lot of decoupling. But I think we still see this as a really interesting model that probably has a place. It may not be the only one, but has a place in the broader PAYGo market going forward if solutions can be found, and obviously a lot of work needs to be done on that, but it's a topic that's really interesting to us. Feels inherently like leveraging the core credit skills of banks and the cost of capital advantages is something that could be a good thing for the industry, whereas others, as Hugh set out, will want to keep that in-house. And then the other piece is really around developing backup servicing options, which we think is just a major, regardless of, we tend to think of it in the context of off-balance sheet, but I think even on-balance sheet, it's a huge risk, and to the extent that we can develop some credible options around that, it's really going to de-risk the industry as a whole and could be really powerful in terms of lowering the risk profile of companies and unlocking new capital and cheaper capital. So, those are sort of two lines of discussion that we're really interested in continuing with like-minded people in the industry, and look forward to having those at various different industry touch points. And likewise, if anyone is interested, please feel free to get in touch.
Yeah, and I'll absolutely echo that as well. And just my thing, thank you to everyone participating. Thank you especially to Alexander, to Hugh, and to Michael for joining Jeff and I on this. As we move forward and as these discussions continue, I think keeping the customer at the center of it is always going to be key, and keeping, if partnerships can deliver lower cost options, the customer wins, and if backup servicing can make sure the lights stay on, then the customer wins, but they also need to be protected, and those risks need to be minded. So thank you, everyone, for joining in today. It's been a really exciting discussion. We look forward to engaging with all of you in the future. Please feel free to keep the conversation going offline. Thanks again to all of you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.